do you find that shippers are unwilling to pay accessorial fees? Well, my experience with that, Robert, was not that they're unwilling. I guess let me put it this way. In some industries, and for some type of shipments, it is common that there's going to be accessorial fees. And I guess it gets, if it's typical in that market that shippers are paying accessorial fees, then most shippers aren't reluctant to do so. In some segments, that may not be the case, and it's typical that they're not. So you have to learn as quickly as possible what the case is. I think the most important thing is that you got to know or have a pretty good idea what types of loads are going to have accessorial fees, lumper fees, and offloading fees and various things, and you've got to factor that in. So it's not really whether shippers are willing to pay a separate add-on fee, but you've got to make sure if that's a typical cost, if you're going to have those kind of fees, that you got to make sure you factor those in and figure that out pretty quick. And again, the process we have is, early on in the process when we are working with a shipper, part of the questioning, even if there's a possibility of doing a load, one of my questions is, besides, where are you typically, what are the most common places you're shipping to? How often are you shipping to them? And one of those questions is, and are there typically accessorial fees? Are there typically lumper fees or other types of fees that apply? And then the follow-up question to that is, and typically, are you going to pay those, or do I have to factor them in on this end? Very simply, you want to know that before you ever take the first load.
That's a good point, asking that question.
Yeah.
Should I factor those into the rate, or that's very good.
Yeah. So it's not just if they do it, it's just, do those loads typically apply? And if not, so either way, you just have to know, because they know the places they're shipping to, it's not usually the first time they've done it, or wherever they're bringing stuff in from. So they'll typically know if certain places are going to have lumper fees or any other kind of fees. And then it's just a simple question, do any of the locations you deliver to, pick up from, charge lumper fees or any other kind of accessorial fees? And the answer is yes or no. And is that something you're going to typically cover on top of whatever the negotiated rate per mile or rate per load is?
I spoke to my business partner yesterday, and he said the hardest one to get is detention fees. He spent 4 hours waiting for.
That's right.
4 hours waiting to deliver and 4 hours waiting to pick up.
There's a whole day. Could be gone.
And that's what he said. The whole working day is gone, just waiting for the load.
And again, that's not uncommon. Some companies will say, okay, if we have to wait more than 2 hours, then we pay X amount of dollars for every hour after the first 2 hours. But that's not usually a negotiated thing. It's something they've already been doing. But you want to ask that, and so that's another one of those questions. Okay.
Yeah.
What about, since you know the locations you ship to and pick up from better than I do at this point. Now, and we've had situations in the past where on a new account, we didn't realize, but they could be sitting there for 4 hours, 5 hours. After what point in time do you start paying a detention fee? Or, after the second hour, after the third hour, do you cover that at all? Again, something to know. And if a company doesn't cover that, you got to be careful. Sometimes that can be a big deal. So the more questions
to get paid.
Yeah, the more questions you ask, the better. Sometimes, unfortunately, you don't find that out, even if you ask about it, until after you run a couple loads. So, but sometimes, even after you get a question, you can do, go to a chat chat room or put something out on a certain location on load boards. There's, you know, chat areas in there, and you can ask queries. You can Google and say, what's the typical time it takes to pick up a load at XYZ location?
Oh,
And you'd be surprised sometimes, you know, what you get. Yeah, I remember Anheuser-Busch locations here in Florida, where typically our trucks are loading like in the middle of the night, or 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m., 5 a.m., you know, but you wanted to get there, you know, as early as possible because they had some pretty long lines. So it wasn't always the process. You just, they had so much volume, you know, if you were at towards the front of the line, then you could wait quite a bit, and they did not pay detention fees. It's just everyone knew the sooner you got there, the less time you had to wait. So good question.